Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Trade negotiations between China and the U.S. are progressing smoothly, according to the latest media reports, and both sides are expected to reach an agreement. But it's a different story for trade dispute between the U.S. and Europe, some say. In a tweet, U.S. President Donald Trump threatened to impose tariffs of $11 billion worth of EU products. The U.S. and Europe have accused each other of illegal subsidies to aircraft giants, Europe-based Airbus and U.S.-based Boeing, to give them an edge in the passenger jet business. Amid the worsening feud, what are the implications of China-U.S. relations on the world's other trading nations? I asked that questions and many more to the heads of the Chamber of the European Union and the Chamber of American Business here in China. Let's listen in our conversation. Tim, Adam, what a pleasure to have both of you on CGTN. I want to start from the trade negotiations. Everybody is following what's going on between China and the United States. Tim, as chairman of AmCham in China, your assessment of what exactly is the nature of these negotiations now?
Well, I think we're getting near to the end game, and by that I mean I think now each side has a pretty clear understanding of the hopes and the expectations of the other side, and so it's a matter of trying to close the remaining gaps. I think it took a while for the Chinese side to understand what the U.S. side was really seeking, and maybe it took a while for the U.S. side to articulate that. But now I think the two sides have real traction in the negotiations, and I think both sides are working very, very hard to try to reach an agreement.
Reach an agreement. What kind of nature is that agreement, according to you, given the knowledge that you have so far?
Part of the agreement will talk about trade and perhaps purchases of American products from China. That's really not the core of the agreement from the point of view of the American business community in China. We're more interested in some of the deeper structural issues, ways in which our two economic systems are different and in some ways incompatible, and that's created some difficult competitive situations, and I think the U.S. business community is interested in addressing those differences.
Adam, well, as the one representing the EU chamber here in China, of course you are watching this very closely, what's going on between China and the United States. Many wonder what's going to be its implications of this trade agreement, if there is any, for the other economies.
It's a good question. Obviously, we are watching it and very interested to see what happens. Obviously, if it results in economic changes, structural changes that are beneficial for all companies, that's something that we would welcome very much. The EU has its concerns in China as well, and so we also are working with the Chinese on what's called a comprehensive agreement on investment. And most recently, it's been announced that EU and China look to complete that by 2020. So I think having the US work on one side and EU working on the other side, hopefully this can be a win-win-win situation.
How much contribution the EU as a whole and individual European capitals could be, given what is going on between China and the United States? Apparently there are some tensions.
Well, in terms of contribution, I mean, let's not forget that approximately 1/2 of China's exports to the world come from foreign companies that are invested here. And from a very broad perspective, EU-China relations are very strong in terms of the trade relationship. We're China's biggest trading partner and number 2 from the European perspective. But very important for us is to build on that. So in terms of investment, I mean, last year European companies invested 10 times as much more in the US than we did in China. Right. So representing European interests here in China, my goal is to bring more investment here, and we can do that if China continues to move a little bit more quickly in terms of its opening.
And how do you see the cooperation and competition with your American counterparts?
I think what we're talking about here are the rules in which we all abide by, and that economic model that we've been talking about as well, making sure that we all have a clear understanding of what those rules are and that we enforce them accordingly.
We do see, for example, recently what's going on in Boeing with the recent accidents. There seem to be much more opportunities provided for the European counterpart, such as Airbus. So how do you see that kind of a competition for a huge potential market like China, which is already your biggest market anyway, Tim?
Well, I think Boeing and Airbus have had very strong competition for many years, and I think everybody benefits from that competition. Sometimes Boeing pushes ahead, sometimes Airbus comes out with a new product or development. And so I think that competition is very good, and I think the world's better off because we have the Europeans and the Americans competing with each other, and we'll be better off to have China also in the competitive mix.
And
yeah, I was just going to add, but what's also very important in all this is what we've been talking about too, is having a clear understanding of the rules and the policies and creating a safe environment as well. So very important for us in terms of cooperating with China is coming to an agreement on a bilateral aviation safety agreement. This was something that's been brought up in the last month with the high-level summit that took place, and that's something that I think would be good for EU and China as well, and for the world.
When we are talking about the relationship of businesses, for example, and trade between China and the United States and China and the EU, there seems to be very different political environment at the back of it. Now, Tim, I have to go to you about the U.S. side, what's going on, because many believe there is a potential, at least a Cold War, building up between these two economies. Now, we know for businesses, it's not prospering in the Cold War situation. What does that mean, the so-called political correctness in the United States for American businesses these days around the world?
In AmCham, what we're trying to do is help our governments understand the legitimate concerns of each other and come up with a new set of guidelines that will be predictable and that will maximize as much as possible the areas for us to continue to do business with one another.
Having said that, though, and also the great work AmCham has been doing as a communicator and a bridge builder, some have been suspecting whether the business communities, particularly the United States ones, are as daring as it used to be to speak out to both governments, particularly the American government, given your political environment right now.
I don't think it's a matter of daring, to be honest.
Is that because you're the chairman of AmCham in China right now? Is that a politically correct statement to make?
I feel free to make whatever statement I'd like to make. And the statement I'd like to make here is that the American business community and also I think the business community from other countries, you can speak about Europe, but I think people have felt that the business environment in China has not been as welcoming for their business in the past. And now we certainly see that the Chinese government is taking steps to address our concerns.
We see a lot of bilateral promising deals being done right now. But when it comes to a platform like the EU, which is taking the pride of being a platform, incorporating and bringing consensus to the EU economies, it's not necessarily as promising as bilateral right now. Is the EU now giving up its strength of bringing the economies together regarding China, particularly regarding cooperating with China?
I don't think so. I mean, the EU last year, or 2 years ago, released its connectivity policy, and this is something that I think works very well with the Belt and Road Initiative, and this is something that's being done on a pan-European level, and it's got the involvement of the member states involved in that as well. So the unity of the European Union, if you look at recent surveys and polls, has never been stronger than it has in the last 10 years. And the recent agreements that we've seen coming out of Brussels, I think, are a strong indicator of that.
The business community has been calling for more opening up and reform, as both of you beautifully illustrated. Now, we had earlier at the two sessions, which I was covering in extensive way, the foreign investment law. Now, many say it is a very structural law with which there are a lot of details that needs to be worked out and also outlined. Now, Tim, to you, what do you think are some of the most important things, with them in mind that you know pragmatism would drive us long, not necessarily just idealism? Tim.
Well, I think the foreign investment law has a lot of very good principles that are enunciated, and I think what the business community is looking to is to see how this will be implemented in practice. I mean, both as a practicing lawyer here and also an AmCham chair, I still have companies calling me and complaining about experiences they're having that violate some of these commitments. But of course, this law doesn't take effect until January 1. So what we're hoping is that there will be implementing regulations and then a kind of a new a spirit and a new discipline within the Chinese bureaucracy that will really implement those principles, because the principles themselves are quite encouraging.
To you, Adam, what does that say? What are some of specific areas you are looking at from the EU perspective?
I think the commitment not to use administrative measures to force technology transfer is something we're very interested in. How they're actually going to do that in practice is going to be interesting to see. We had some concern about the word administrative. From our point of view, it should be any measure shouldn't be used to force technology transfer, not simply administrative. I've discussed this issue many times with my Chinese counterparts, and it's an interesting one because sometimes they say, well, where's the legislation that says it's a forced technology transfer? Sometimes the understanding of what forced technology transfer varies from simply a local official saying, hey, if you want to get your permit or your license, you need to transfer the technology, which is very direct and very clear, and I think a simple way of looking at it. Other ways of looking at it is a lot of companies, China's done a good job at reducing joint venture requirements in financial sector, in the auto sector, but they still exist in a lot of the service industry and agriculture. And for a lot of companies that want to invest here, for them to do that joint venture, they have to offer something, and it's their technology.
We are in an uncharted water. So a lot of things are all on the learning curve for every one of us. We have never done this before, but there's something that we need to do. So how can we work together to figure out what are the bottom lines of every party involved and be able to take care of it as much as possible? But at the end of the day, you still need to get one thing done. So that is the thing we're discussing here as well. It's not only what's in the law, but also how different parties, listening to your voices coming from different players, the Chinese would work with you eventually for the final products when it comes to details. To your knowledge, what exactly will be likely this process, and how are you going to contribute not just to the Chinese side but also be able to talk to one another about that? Tim.
I think the most challenging part of the trade negotiations right now between the U.S. and China is what they're referring to as an enforcement mechanism. Right now, the two countries were trying to solve problems through negotiations and dialogues. That didn't work from the U.S. perspective, so they imposed tariffs. And so China didn't like that, so they imposed tariffs. The question is, in the future, when we have significant disputes, can we resolve it without, again, imposing tariffs or taking other measures like that? Or will we be able to sit down and talk the issues through and resolve them without having to resort to that? To me, that's the most important question.
And is there any solution to that, sir?
Well, I think both countries have to recognize that that they both better listen to the other side, and they ought to take the concerns of the other side seriously. I think both sides recognize that if that doesn't happen, then we'll be back in the near future to where we are today.
To you, Adam, what exactly is it?
We were talking about earlier globalization, making sure that the benefits don't leave people behind. And I think one thing that needs to be discussed as well is making use of global institutions and multilateral systems. So WTO reform, everybody agrees, WTO needs to be reformed. People have different priorities on what aspects of that need to happen, but that certainly needs to happen, and it needs to happen for not simply for the issues that we're all aware of, but I would also say countries are competing against each other, and many of them will then have policies that quite frankly leave themselves in a less opportune situation to ensure that that those that are being left behind are better taken care of.
What do you think is the key here when we talk about whether the business community will still be the very important component for a future discussion of both the stability, peace, and hopefully a better economies on different sides? Adam.
I think it's what actually happens. There's a lot of things being said in the media and by senior leadership, and many people say we welcome statements on this and that, but ultimately what's most important is actual action that is taken. So as I've said, we've seen that in a couple of areas where China has made those reforms in the last year or two, but we're looking to see more. And business, as I said earlier, they respond to that. They see market opening and they feel more welcome. They see market opening and they invest more. We've had, I'd say, half a dozen European companies that have made multi-billion-dollar investments because of the most recent openings. So when that happens, the investment will come, the confidence will come with it as well.
And Tim, to you, what role can the business community eventually play? What are going to make the business communities in different parts of the world still relevant today?
Well, I think the benefits from our business activities to all the countries concerned make us very relevant. I think that because we're here on the ground, we live and breathe business in China. And so I think we have a very realistic and concrete sense of how things are working.
Right.
And I think we're in a very good position to help the government of China and our own home countries understand what the issues are so that we can focus on the real problems and find solutions.
Tim, Adam, what a pleasure to have both of you gentlemen for being with us, helping us from your perspective what exactly is going on. It's very important understanding. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.